in bacteria in 2 hours. First of all, if we summarize the things that we are going to deal in this hour, will be we will first discuss the mechanisms of antibiotics. We will give the definition for it. And then in the second hour, we will discuss the antibiotic resistance mechanisms that we see in bacteria. And we will discuss how it forms and spread between different bacteria, and what are the results of this antibiotic resistance for global health. And of course, at the last step, we will discuss with a couple of slides the what we can do against the antibiotic resistance as a health carrier. So first of all, let's give a definition for antibiotic and antibacterial agent. Actually, in real world, we are using these two terms instead of one to other, but there is a little difference between these two terms. When we say antibiotic, it means that it is a chemical compounds which is found naturally. But sorry? Could you please shut your voices, please? Okay.
Hocam hazır olmuşken bir şey sorabilir miyim?
Yes, please.
Biraz daha sesli konuşabilir misiniz?
Şu anda nasıl? Is it okay now?
Şimdi daha iyi hocam.
Let me open the volume, maybe it will help. Is it better now?
Evet hocam, teşekkürler.
You're welcome. I said that when we use the term antibiotic, it means that it is made from chemical compounds which are found naturally, okay? But when we say antibacterial agent, it can be a compound which is found naturally, or we can synthesize it in the laboratory. So you can use these terms instead of each other, but the real explanation for both terms is this. Okay. Actually, antibiotics are very important compounds actually against bacterial infections. When we look at the meanings of the verb, anti means against and biotic means living things. So together it means against living things. In that case, against bacteria. When we look at the history of the antibiotics, as you know, the first antibiotic is found by Dr. Alexander Fleming in 1928. But as a drug, the first antibiotics is introduced as medicine in the beginning of 1940s. Let's a little bit say about the history of the discovery of the penicillin, the first antibiotics. Dr. Alexander Fleming actually is a very massive scientist. After a long holiday, he came to the laboratory and realized that a mold growth on a bacteria culture, which we call as Staphylococcus aureus. It is a bacteria, one of the bacteria. And he realized that Staphylococcus aureus couldn't grow anywhere near the mold. And this mold, he thought that this mold secretes something. He doesn't know, of course, what is the molecule, but he thinks that this mold must secrete something which inhibits the growth of this bacteria. This bacteria is called as penicillium, and penicillin is the molecule which is found in this mold. And the bacteria around this mold was dissolving. Uh, at the end, we can say that Alexander Fleming discovered the antimicrobial properties of penicillin in 1928, and at the beginning of 1940s, Florian Chain, other two doctors, are the ones which began work with isolating this molecule and synthesizing large amounts of this molecule, which we called as penicillin. Therefore, at the end, at the late 14th, we started to use penicillin against the patient's infections. When you write penicillin in the Google and search the verb, you will see many pictures or drawings like this, because at the Second World War, actually penicillin helped to many soldiers dying from bacterial infections. So it is very important for the bacterial infections at that time. As you know, today we are using penicillin or other beta-lactams antibiotics against streptococci infections, and we can deal with streptococcus infections very easily nowadays. However, when you look at the 1940s or at the beginning of 1930s, before the 1930s or 1940s, as you see here, many people die from streptococcal infections, as they didn't have antibiotics at that time. Therefore, after the discovery of the penicillin, as you can understand easily, the people started to survive after streptococci infection. So it is very important, of course. So after 1930s, the antibiotics are called as miracle cure because, as I explained before the discovery of penicillin, many people were dying because of bacterial infections. After the discovery of the penicillin, the researchers, the scientists, started to search new molecules that they can use for bacterial infections. So as you see here, they found many different molecules which are made by different kinds of, especially soil bacteria or soil molds. They found these molecules and they discovered new molecules, and many different kinds of antibiotics are found. So, what is important, what is the main subject of this lecture is, yes, antibiotics are very helpful against bacterial infections. However, we have to be very careful while we are using them. Why? Because we don't know that whether the infectious disease is caused by a bacteria or by a virus or by a fungi. So first of all, we have to find the causative agent of infectious diseases. Why? If it is a viral infection, we mustn't never use antibiotics. However, nowadays, in the society, as you hear, I guess, the people are using antibiotics for respiratory tract infections, whether it is belong to bacteria or virus. So first of all, you have to find out that this is not a viral infection. If it is a viral infection which causes respiratory tract infections, let's say it's COVID-19 or it is influenza, you mustn't use antibiotics. If it is a bacteria, if the causative agent is the bacteria, yes, of course, you can use antibiotics against this infection. So, as I said, there are many different kinds of antibiotics that we are using today. So, first of all, let's learn how we classify these antibiotics in microbiology or in infectious diseases. Classification can be made differently. First classification is based on chemical or biosynthetic origin, the origin of antibiotics. The second classification is based on a mode of action. The third classification is depend on spectrum of activity, and the fourth one is depends on the target of the antibiotics. Let's start with the first one, please. If we look at the sources of antibiotics, as I explained at the first slides, the source of antibiotics can be natural, uh, or it can be synthetic, or it can be semi-synthetic. When we are saying it is a natural antibiotics, as I explained before, it's mainly found in the nature, especially in the soil, in the soil bacteria or in the soil molds. When I say semi-synthetic, it means that the molecule is mainly natural. However, we make a little bit differences on the molecules in the laboratory, but it is mainly natural. When we say it is synthetic, it means the antibiotic molecule is designed, is made from beginning to end in the laboratory. The second type of classification is based on a mode of action of antibiotic. According to mode of action of antibiotic, we divide the antibiotics into two groups. One group is called as bactericidal. The other group is called as bacteriostatic. When we say bactericidal, it means that the antibiotic molecule kills all the bacteria in the body. Okay, all the bacteria which cause the infectious diseases. However, when we say bacteriostatic, it means that the antibiotic do not kill the bacteria. It only stops the growth of bacteria. Therefore, if you have a chance to choose whether a bactericidal antibiotic or a bacteriostatic antibiotic for treating one of the infection, you have to choose the cidal antibiotic. Why? Because it kills the bacteria. However, the static antibiotics only stops the growth. So if you have a chance, sometimes we do not have a chance. We have to choose the bacteriostatic antibiotic. But if you have a chance, please choose the cidal antibiotics. Okay. As you see here, penicillin is one of an example for cidal antibiotics, and tetracycline is an example for bacteriostatic antibiotics. As you see here, if there is no antibiotic, the bacteria grows on. However, when you give a cidal antibiotics, when you add the cidal penicillin, at that time, as you see, the number of bacteria quickly drops away. However, look at the tetracycline, it's a static antibiotic. When you add the tetracycline, when you give the tetracycline to the patient, the bacteria do not aren't killed by the antibiotics. They live, but the antibiotics stop the growth of the bacteria. The third way of classification of antibiotics antibiotic is depends on spectrum of action. According to the spectrum of action, again we divide the antibiotics into two groups. One of them is called as narrow antibiotics. the other one is called as broad antibiotics. When we say narrow antibiotics, it means that this group of antibiotics active against limited few number of groups of microbes. However, when we look at the broad type antibiotics, they can act on different groups of bacteria. If you have a chance, you have to choose the narrow one because we don't want to cause development of antibiotic resistance by using broad type antibiotics. However, sometimes we have to use, of course, broad type antibiotics. But first of all, you have to find the causative agent of infectious disease. If you find the causative agent of infectious diseases, of course, you can apply easily a narrow type of antibiotics in that case. So, this is the slide which is showing that whether a narrow antibiotic nor broad type antibiotics, it doesn't matter. No antibiotic is effective against all microbes. So, let's give a summary then. Then, what is the ideal antibiotic? What is the ideal drug? First of all, we have to choose a drug which has selective toxicity. What does it mean? When we give an antibiotic, it targets some place in the bacteria. However, if these antibiotics, let's say that the antibiotics is targeting the cell membrane, we have also cell membrane. So we will see, therefore, there will not be a selective toxicity, okay? However, let's say that we use an antibiotic against cell wall of the bacteria. Our cells, human being cells, do not have cell wall. Therefore, it is good. The antibiotics which are targeting the cell wall, they are very good molecules for using against infectious diseases. And another thing will be antimicrobial actions. What did I say? I said that if you have a chance, use cidal antibiotics instead of static antibiotics because cidal kills, static stops the growing. And the third one will be spectrum of activity, broad or narrow. We will first try to choose the narrow one instead of broad antibiotics. Fourth one will be favorable pharmacokinetics. I will explain at the end. Fifth one will be the lack of side effects. And the sixth one will be the little resistance development. Okay, let's look at the fourth one again. Favorable pharmacokinetics. What is the meaning of favorable pharmacokinetics? Let's say that the patient has a Mannix infection. What is Mannix? Mannix is the membrane of our brain, okay? So if the patient has a Mannix infection, we call it in infectious diseases meningitis, okay? If the patient has a meningitis, the antibiotic that we give to the patient must cross brain-blood barrier. Not all the antibiotics can cross blood-brain barrier, okay? Therefore, if the patient has a meningitis, if an infection is of Mannix, we have to choose the antibiotics which have characteristics of crossing the blood-brain barrier, okay? That is, we call favorable pharmacokinetics. It's an example for this point. So there is no, of course, perfect drug, but we are trying to choose the most perfect one for treating the patients. Okay, the last classification will depend on the targets, and I will explain all the antibiotics by using this classification today. When we deal with the targets, we see that there are some antibiotics which inhibits the cell wall synthesis. There are some antibiotics which inhibits protein synthesis, or there are antibiotics which inhibits the membrane function. There are ones which inhibits nucleic acid synthesis, and there are ones which inhibits which acts as anti metabolites. So let's begin with the inhibitor of cell wall synthesis. Actually, the antibiotics which are found in this group are the best one, I can say. Why? Because they target the cell wall peptidoglycan layer. So we do not have, the human beings, the patients do not have cell wall. Therefore, these drugs are actually perfect for using for the patients. Okay, when we deal with the antibiotics which affects the cell wall, first of all, there is a big group which we are calling it as beta-lactam group of antibiotics. We call these antibiotics as beta-lactam because all of them, penicillins, cephalosporins, carbapenems, and monobactams, all of them have a beta-lactam ring in their structure, all of them. That is the reason why we are calling them as beta-lactam group antibiotics. As you see here, under the penicillin group, under the cephalosporin group, under the carbapenems and monobactams, there are a lot of antibiotics that are found until today. All of them are found under the beta-lactam antibiotic groups. However, we have also other antibiotics which do not have beta-lactam ring in their structure, but they again act on cell wall of the bacteria. What are they? They are glycopeptides, they are fosomycin, cytocerin, and bacitracin.
Hocam bir şey sorabilir miyim?
Let's begin from the beta-lactam antibiotics, and after that we will deal with other antibiotics. Could you please ask your questions at the end of the lesson? Okay.
Okay.
We will start from beta-lactam group antibiotics. Later we will deal with other antibiotics. Okay. The first group of antibiotics which acts on the cell wall of bacteria are beta-lactam antibiotics. As I said, we call them as beta-lactam antibiotics because all of them have beta-lactam ring in their structure. All of them, all the antibiotics which acts on cell wall are bactericidal. Okay, because when you remove or when you inhibit the synthesis of cell wall, the bacteria will die. Okay, so all the antibiotics, all the beta-lactam antibiotics have the beta-lactam ring in their body. All of them are bactericidal, and when we look at the mechanism of action, all the beta-lactam antibiotics, all of them, penicillin, cephalosporins, monobactams, or carbapenems, all of them inhibits the action of enzymes which make transpeptidation. These enzymes are called as you remember from our lessons before we did with you, these enzymes which do transpeptidation is called as PBP, penicillin binding protein, or transpeptidase. Therefore, all beta-lactam group antibiotics bind to this enzyme and stop transpeptidation. If transpeptidation stops, then you can't make cell wall. If you do not make cell wall, bacteria dies. Okay, here you see the cell wall structure. You learned it with me 3 or 4 weeks ago, you see in the cell wall, in the peptidoglycan layer, peptidoglycan is made by N-acetylmuramic acid and N-acetylglucosamine. And N-acetylmuramic acid and N-acetylglucosamine are making glycan chains, and these glycan chains are bound together with cross-linkage, which is these cross-linkages are made with PBP, or in other words, transpeptidase enzymes. Okay, here you are seeing the antibiotics which have beta-lactam ring in their structure: penicillins, cephalosporins, monobactam, and carbapenems. The beta-lactam ring actually is a structural analog of dialanine. Normally, penicillin binding proteins, the enzyme which makes cross-peptidation, normally binds to dialanine, which are found in peptide chains, which are bound to N-acetylmuramic acid. Okay. However, when you give beta-lactam group antibiotics to the patient, the enzyme which makes cross-peptides, the PBP, the PPP, instead of binding dialanine, it goes and binds to false substrate. What is the false substrate? False substrate will be the beta-lactam antibiotic. Instead of binding to dialanine, normally PBP have to bind to dialanine and make transpeptidation. However, when you give beta-lactam group antibiotic to the patient, therefore the enzyme binds to beta-lactam group antibiotic, which is similar to dialanine. The enzyme binds to antibiotic instead of dialanine. Therefore, the transpeptidation stopped, and the cell wall will not be made, and the bacteria will die. Okay, here as you see, without antibiotic, PBP, the enzyme, goes and binds to the dialanine and make cross-linkage between the peptide bonds, between the peptides, side peptides found on the N-acetylmuramic acid. However, when we give antibiotic, the beta-lactam group antibiotics will go and bind to the active site of the enzyme. Therefore, this enzyme cannot make cross-linkage in the cell wall. Okay. Now, some of the bacteria, whether they are gram-positive or gram-negative bacteria, it doesn't matter. Both groups can have an enzyme which we call as beta-lactamase. What is the function of this enzyme? The bacteria which are producing beta-lactamase break down the antibiotics, the beta-lactam antibiotics. When this enzyme breaks down the beta-lactam antibiotics, therefore this antibiotics cannot show its effect against bacteria. Okay. So, what we are doing against these bacteria then? We are giving 2 antibiotics together. One of them is against beta-lactamase enzyme. We are calling them as beta-lactamase inhibitors. And the other one is the beta-lactam group antibiotic. Okay? We are giving them together. So what happens? At the left side, you are seeing a bacteria which have beta-lactamase. When you give beta-lactam group of antibiotic to this bacteria will secrete beta-lactamase enzyme and inhibits the activity of beta-lactam group of antibiotic. However, when you give at the right side, when you give beta-lactam group of antibiotic together with beta-lactamase inhibitor, this beta-lactamase inhibitor will go and bind to the beta-lactamase inhibitor and stop it. Therefore, the beta-lactam group of antibiotic will function on the bacteria. Okay. In gram-positive bacteria, the beta-lactamase enzyme diffuses to the outside of the bacteria. However, in gram-negative bacteria, it is found in the periplasmic space. Okay, now let's discuss the antibiotics one by one, which are found in beta-lactam group: penicillins, cephalosporins, monobactams, and carbapenems. Let's start with penicillins. Penicillins contains many different antibiotics in it. Some of them are natural, some of them are semi-synthetic forms, and they are the major source, of course, is the mold called as penicillium. All of them, of course, contains beta-lactam ring, as I said. What is the difference between the antibiotics found in the penicillin group is they differ by the side chains of the molecules are different from each other. Therefore, as the side chains is different from each other, the activity changes. The activity of the antibiotics changes. Here you see the classification of the penicillins. Some of them have narrow spectrum, some of them have broad spectrum. Narrow spectrum penicillins generally act on gram-positive bacteria. However, broad spectrum penicillins acts on, for example, more gram-negative bacteria. Some of them act in some special bacteria, for example, in Pseudomonas or Staphylococci, and we can use these antibiotics together with beta-lactamase inhibitors. The second group of beta-lactam group of antibiotics are cephalosporins. Cephalosporins are also contains beta-lactam ring, and they are also cidal. They effect on penicillin binding proteins. They are generally more stable to beta-lactamase enzyme than penicillin group, and they have broader spectrum. Therefore, we are using cephalosporins. We use them against penicillin resistant strains. We classify the cephalosporins according to their spectrum. There are 5 generations of cephalosporins. As you see here, some are first, second, third, fourth, and fifth generation. For example, some of these generations act on anaerobic bacteria. Some have more activity on gram-positive bacteria. However, some of them have more gram-negative activity. As you see here, when you look at the first generation of cephalosporins, they are more active on gram-positive bacteria. However, when you come to third generation cephalosporins, they are more active on gram-negative bacteria. The fourth generations are better than the third generation, and the fifth generation have a special activity on MRSA, methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus. Okay. The third beta-lactam group of carbapenems, the third beta-lactam group of antibiotics are called as carbapenems. They are very important antibiotics for today because they have a very broad spectrum of activity. These antibiotics, carbapenems, are effective against many gram-negative bacteria, gram-positive bacteria, and anaerobic bacteria also, but they do not, of course, have activity against some of the bacteria. there are, of course, a lot of kinds of carbapenems, but the three antibiotics that I write here are found in Turkey. We are using them in the clinics. As I said, that carbapenems are very important antibiotics for us against infectious diseases. Um, and they are very important. Why they are very important? They are the beta-lactamases secreted by bacteria do not affect carbapenems. If the bacteria have beta-lactamase, we can easily use carbapenems against the bacteria which have beta-lactamase. However, unfortunately, on the last 2 decades, we have been isolating many different bacteria which are causing hospital infectious diseases, which have carbapenemases. If the bacteria have carbapenemases, that means that it will stop the effect of carbapenems. So it is very dangerous because we are using carbapenems at the last line against the infectious diseases. So if we cannot use carbapenems against bacteria because of carbapenemases, that means that we cannot find any other antibiotics for treating the patients. So it is very important. The last one, which has beta-lactamine in its structure, is called as monobactams. Monobactams are only used for gram-negative bacteria. They bind to penicillin binding protein 3 of gram-negative bacterial cells. So, until now, we discussed shortly penicillin, cephalosporins, carbapenems, and monobactams, which are included in beta-lactam antibiotics. However, what did I say before? I said that we have other antibiotics which also affect the cell wall. Now we will discuss the other antibiotics than beta-lactam antibiotics. Okay, the first group will be glycopeptides. The two important compounds which are found in glycopeptides are vancomycin and teicoplanin. As they act on cell wall, of course they are cidal. Okay, as they are acting on cell wall, we are calling we can call them as bactericidal. As they are huge molecules, these huge molecules, big molecules, cannot transfer from gram-negative cell wall. Therefore, we cannot use these glycopeptides against gram-negative bacteria. We can only use glycopeptides against gram-positive bacteria. So, until now, we discussed the mode of action of beta-lactam antibiotics, right? Now, let's discuss the mode of action of glycopeptides. It is different from beta-lactams. What did we say for beta-lactams? Beta-lactam molecules goes and binds to the enzyme PBP. Therefore, this enzyme cannot go and binds to its real target. However, when we are dealing with glycopeptides, in that case, glycopeptides not binding to the enzyme. The glycopeptides bind to the target. In that case, the target is dialanine. As glycopeptides bind to the target dialanine, therefore, it closes the target for the enzyme. At the end, the PPP cannot come and bind to the target, the real target. Okay, as a summary, normally penicillin binding proteins goes and binds to the peptide chain, which are bound to N-acetyluronic acid, dialanine part. After PBP binding to dialanine, it makes transpeptidation. However, if you give beta-lactam group of antibiotics to the patient, the beta-lactam antibiotics goes and binds to the enzyme, active part of enzyme. Therefore, the enzyme cannot bind to the target. In the case of glycopeptides do not bind to the enzyme. Glycopeptides bind to the target. Target is D-alanine, D-alanine. As glycopeptides bind to the D-alanine, D-alanine, the enzyme PBP cannot bind to the target and cannot make transpeptidation. Okay. Now let's discuss the other three groups of antibiotics which are affecting on cell wall. But before that, let's remember the cell wall synthesis a little bit, okay? In the cell wall, in the peptidoglycan is made of N-acetylmuronic acid and N-acetylglucosamine, right? NAM, NAC, NAM, NAC subunits. And these subunits are making chains. And between the chains, the transpeptidation is made by penicillin binding proteins, okay? All the subunits, in that case, NAM and NAC are all produced in the cytosol. In the cytosol, the N-acetylmuronic acid NAM subunit is produced from NAC. From NAC to NAM production, an enzyme which is called as MurA take function. So therefore, as a summary, NAM is produced from NAC by the help of MurA enzyme. Okay, here you see the action of the antibiotics. Okay, the first molecule that we are going to discuss is fosfomycin. Fosfomycin is an antibiotic which inhibits MurA enzyme. If it inhibits MurA, it means that N-acetylmuronic acid NAM subunit cannot be formed from NAC subunit. If there is no NAC subunit, it means that the peptidoglycan will not be formed. Okay, so by giving fosfomycin, you stop the cell wall production at the beginning. The second one is cycloserine. Cycloserine is an analog of the alanine molecule. Cycloserine acts in two ways. First one is it inhibits the conversion of alanine to dialanine. Okay, and the other function of this antibiotic is it inhibits the dimerization of dialanine. So it affects the bacteria by two different ways. As a result, the bacteria will not produce the alanine. If it cannot produce the alanine, then it means that there will be no and binds alanine. If there is no alanine, there will be no. If there is no cross-peptidation, the bacteria will die away. The third group of antibiotics which affects on cell wall will be bacitracin. Bacitracin acts on a lipid carrier. What is the function of this lipid carrier? This lipid carrier transfers N-acetylmuronic acid and N-acetylglucosamine across the cytoplasmic membrane. So if the antibiotic bacitracin goes and binds to this lipid carrier, it means that NAM-NAC subunits will not carry over against the cytoplasmic membrane. So again, cell wall synthesis will be inhibited at the beginning. Okay, this is the schema for explaining all the stages of cell wall synthesis for you for understanding better. This is also like this. Okay, and as a summary, we can say that fosomycin, cytoserine, and bacitracin all inhibit the first steps of cell wall synthesis. However, beta-lactam group of antibiotics and glycopeptides acts on the at the end of the cell wall synthesis. Okay, we finished the antibiotics which affects on cell wall. We will discuss the other antibiotics at the second lecture. So let's have a break. Okay, 10 minutes break. We will continue.